How's it going, guys? And this will be giving you my 2017-2018 NHL season predictions. Starting off with the Western Conference at the number 15 spot, finishing last place in the conference. I had the Colorado Avalanche finishing last place 2 years in a row. I feel like they did maybe get a bit better than last year, but last year they finished 20 points below second last, so they could get 10 more wins and still be last place, which I think is going to happen. I think they're going to have a better year, but still not good enough to break out of that last place spot. Obviously, Rantanen and Josh are going to be huge additions to that offense, both entering their first full season, but the defense is still really bad. Varlamov, I'm still not sure about, and they don't even have Picard now to back him up. They did add a couple of guys in like Wilson and Yakupov, but I just don't think it's going to be enough for them to get out of that last place spot. Next up here, number 14, the Vancouver Canucks finishing second last. So like Colorado, I think they're just going to be another bad team this year. They did make some additions like Gagne, Del Zotto, Vanek, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think Vancouver is definitely going to be bottom 5 team this year, hoping to get Dallin or Svechnikov in the lottery. I think they're still doing the rebuild. The Steens are getting older. They got Eriksson on a really bad contract. There's actually a few bad contracts on that team, so really, for me, Canucks are a bit better than Avalanche, but still a bottom 5 team in the league. And next up at number 13, I actually had the Vegas Golden Knights, a new expansion team. So this might be a surprise to some of you, but honestly, looking at their team throughout, I think they're a bit stronger of a team than both Colorado and Vancouver. Goaltending is going to be huge for them. Like, if Fleury plays well, he's not going to allow them to get last place in that conference. Their defense, they don't really have any all-stars, even though Theodore could become one. But I think they have like a good amount of depth on D. And then forwards, like the defense, they don't really have a superstar, but they do have a good amount of forward depth. So just having that depth in all 3 positions. Really no weak spots on the team, but obviously, like I said, no game changes. Should make it so that they're not last place, they're not the worst team, but obviously they're not going to be a playoff team either. And next up, number 12, you actually have the LA Kings. So they missed the playoffs last year, I think just barely. I thought they would have been a playoff team last year, but I mean, watching them last year, looking at them this year, I think they're just a team on the decline. They're getting old. Obviously, Toffoli and Pearson are both pretty young, but other than that, I mean, they have Doughty, who's still in his 20s. Kopitar's getting up there, though. They still have Brown, that terrible deal. Same with Gabrick. Really not a lot of forward depth. Their defense is pretty solid. Doughty, Martinez, and Muzzin. They lost McNabb, though, to Vegas. They still have a really strong goaltender in Jonathan Quick as well. They still have Carter up front. But like I said, I just feel like they don't have enough forward depth. And I think they're a team that's just aging on the decline. And looking at other teams in the West, I think they're going to be on the outside looking in again. Next up at number 11, we have the Arizona Coyotes. So still missing the playoffs, but an improvement from last year. I think they made a lot of nice moves this offseason. The trade for Stepan, the trade for Jarmelson, the trade for Demers. Like, I think they've won every trade they've made this summer. They also have a ton of really good young players being added to the lineup. Like, I think Clayton Keller only played 15, maybe 20 games last year. He could honestly be a Calder candidate in my opinion. Then they have a ton of other young players who are probably going to be looking at breakout years. You got Dylan Strome, who may or may not make the team. I'm not sure about that one. Obviously, Domi Duclair is still on the team. You got Dvorak, you got Perlini. Like, they have a ton of young players who are trying to look to who are going to be looking to make an impact. And I think as long as like a few of them do, Coyotes are going to have a much better season. But like I said, still not a playoff team for me. Next up now, number 10. This is going to cause a lot of controversy, I think. I actually have the Chicago Blackhawks. So compared to the Arizona Coyotes, I think Chicago lost every trade they made this offseason. I think the Panarin trade was horrible for them. They got Saad back, who in my opinion is a worse player. Obviously, you could say he's a better defensive player, but Panarin's just a pure scorer, and I think that's something Chicago really does need, as after Kane, they don't really have that. They also lost Tyler Mott as like a decent, at least, bottom 6 guy in my opinion. They also made that Jarmelson trade with Arizona, getting Connor Murphy back, who I don't think is as good as Jarmelson. They also lost Darling, who's a solid backup. They also lost Hossa, who obviously is a veteran, is older, but he's still a good player. Lost him for nothing. They also lost both TVR and Kruger to Vegas. Like, they lost so many players this year. I don't think they got better at all. I think they got much worse. And I think Nashville sort of exposed them last year in the first round of that playoff, sweeping them for nothing. So I think they're a team like LA Kings who's getting older. They're on the decline. So I think for the first time in like 8 years, the Blackhawks are going to miss the playoffs. I think there's just too many other good teams in the West, especially the Central Division. Central Division, in my opinion, is a lot stronger than the Pacific. And then finally, guys, number 9, the last team to miss the playoffs, who's probably going to miss it just barely. I have the San Jose Sharks. So very similar to Chicago and LA. I think they're a good team that's aging, getting older, getting slower, getting worse. Still have a good goalie in Jones. Obviously, their defense still solid with Burns and Edward Vlasic. Forwards, though, they lost Marlowe. And 2, looking at their forward lineup, they don't have a lot of depth to me. Like, a lot of the younger players that are going to make the team this year, I don't think are game breakers. So for me, the Sharks are going to be competitive, but they're probably going to miss by just 1 or 2 points. Moving on now to the playoff teams in the West, we have the St. Louis Blues at number 8. So this is a team I think I was low on last year. Then they ended up finishing like 2nd or whatever. But for me, the Blues, they're a good team. They're a playoff team. Probably going to squeak in. Obviously, they could finish higher. It's really tough to say, but I do think they're for sure going to be a playoff team. Next up, number 7. So this is like a dark horse team for me. If I get this right, I'm going to look really smart. If I get this wrong, I'm going to look stupid. I had the Winnipeg Jets. So I think, honestly, this is going to be like their coming out party. They made the playoffs a few years ago, haven't made it since. That's the only time in their franchise history they made it. They got swept too. But I think that top line, Laine, Scheifele, Wheeler, or if they put Ehlers on the top line, might be the best line in hockey. I think their defense is really solid with Byfuglien, Myers, Enstrom, Trouba, Morrissey, whoever they want to put as the 6th guy. And also, too, behind that top line, they have so much depth. If Mason can come in and kind of hold that starter role, or maybe Hellebuck wins it from him, I think they're going to have some good goaltending, hopefully, this year. And I think they're going to make the playoffs and, honestly, do a lot of damage in the regular season. And next up, guys, number 6, we have the Calgary Flames, another Canadian team. I think, obviously, they got a lot better in the summer. That Travis Hamonic trade's awesome. Gives them, in my opinion, the second best top 4 in the league with Giordano, Brody, Hamilton, and Hamonic. The only team that's a better top 4 is Nashville when they're healthy. Yossi, Subban, Ekholm, and Ellis. So their top 4D is amazing. Mike Smith coming in as the starter, probably going to be a big boost for them. They've been looking for like a starting goaltender for like the last 2 years. They keep just cycling guys in and out. Also, too, the forward group's really solid with Gaudreau and Monahan. They've got a good amount of depth. Plus, they just signed Jaromir Jagr. Jagr doesn't miss the playoffs. Even though he did last year, he's not going to miss it this year. So I think Calgary there gets 6th. Moving on to number 5, I have the Anaheim Ducks. Anaheim's obviously always a good team in the regular season. I don't think that changes this year. Honestly, didn't really lose much. They lost Theodore to Vegas, but I don't even think he was like a regular player on the team last year. Still a very good defense, even with Vatanen injured. Lindholm, Fowler, Montour, Mason, like solid defense. Gibson's a good goalie. Still have a lot of good forward depth. If Getzlaf can play like he did in the playoffs, even for like half the regular season, Perry can maybe do a bit better. Silverberg, Raquel, I think they're definitely a strong playoff team. Next up, number 4, I have the Nashville Predators. Just talking about them. In my opinion, the best top 4 in the league, even with Ellis injured for a few months. They should still find themselves in a playoff position at the end of the year. Rene, I think, is a very solid starting goaltender. Obviously, they did lose Neal to Vegas, and they lost Fisher to retirement. But, I mean, they have a lot of young players coming up. Fiala, for instance, I think, have a huge year filling in for James Neal. They still have a lot of forward depth, too, behind that top line with, like, Arvidsson, Forsberg, Johansson. So, very excited to see what Nashville does this year. They barely squeaked in last year, but I think this year they'll be one of the top teams in the West. Next up, number 3, with the Dallas Stars. They actually missed last year, but similar to Arizona, I think they made a ton of huge additions this year, and I think for them it's going to be enough to push them back in the playoffs. For Arizona, it's not going to be quite enough. The Radulov signing, the top line there of Ben, Seg, and Radulov might be like the second best line in hockey behind the Winnipeg line. The Methot signing, I think he's going to be a great addition on a top pair with Klingberg. I think Honka might make that team, which would be a huge addition to their defense. Really good offensive defenseman. And then obviously, too, the Ben Bishop signing. They've been looking for a starting goaltender forever. The Letton and Niemi combo was just not working. And I'm a huge believer in Bishop. I think last year was a rough year because he kind of knew he was going to be out of Tampa. And I think he was injured for a bit too, but I think he's going to return to form this year in Dallas and honestly have a great year. So I see Dallas being a top 3 team in the West. Honestly, really excited to watch that team and how they play. Moving on now to number 2, the top team in the Central. I have the Minnesota Wild. I think they might have the best forward depth in the NHL. Like, if you look at their 4 lines, like, every line is solid. I don't think they have the best line by any means, but they do have, I think, just the most depth. Like, every single line is a solid line. Even their defense, you got Suter, Spurgeon, Brodin, Dumba. Like, they lost Scandella, and they're still stacked at D. Dubnyk, of course, one of the best goalies in the NHL. He's kind of proven that the last 2 years. I think they're going to be a very solid team again, win the Central, and finish second in the West. And finally, guys, at number 1 here, you know what's coming. Winning not only the Pacific, but also the Western Conference. We have the Edmonton Oilers. I think Connor McDavid, best player in the league, tied with Sidney Crosby. Going to be another huge year for him. Draisaitl, even if he gets like 60 points, he's still obviously a huge piece in that offense. The Eberle for Strome trade, very interested to see what happens there. If Yamato makes a team on the top line with McDavid, I think he could do some damage. They are missing Sekera, though, for the beginning of the season, which I think will hurt them. Don't think they'll be like a President's Trophy candidate because of that. I think it'll be a team from the East, but still a solid defense with that top pair of Clefbaum, Larson. Cam Talbot showed last year why he's like one of the better goalies in the league. I'd probably say he's like maybe 10th, 11th best goalie in the league. And similar to Minnesota, looking at Edmonton's lines, I think they have a lot of forward depth, which obviously is huge for the regular season in terms of injuries, matchups, things like that. If you guys really couldn't tell, my kind of like criteria for a good team is like, do they have some high power scoring, like some superstars? Do they have forward depth? Do they have defensive depth? And then do they have an elite starting goaltender? So I think Edmonton has all of that. And I think McDavid, honestly, there's like a McDavid factor where like the fact they have McDavid just makes them on another tier, and that's why they're going to be winning the Western Conference. Now we're going to be moving on from the Western Conference to the Eastern Conference. So starting us off at number 16, the last place team in the East, I have my favorite team, the Detroit Red Wings. Honestly, this one hurts. It's like Edmonton I would consider my second favorite team, my favorite Canadian team, and I think they're going to have a great year. And then my favorite team, the Red Wings, I think are going to be just terrible. It sucks to say, but last year they did okay. And looking at last year's stats too, I think they went something like 9-0 in the shootout, and they still finished second last in the East. So you're not going to go 9-0 in the shootout again. You take away those 4 points, and they're actually last in the East. Not only that, their team, more than any other team I think in the league, is getting so much older, so much slower. They do have a couple young good players in Larkin, Mantha, Athanasiou if he actually signs, but Red Wings have a very rough defense, possibly like the worst defense in the league. Mrazek and Howard are both decent goalies. They've both been good, but like right now they're both, I would just say, decent, so that's tough. The forward group, like I said, you got Larkin and Mantha. Zetterberg's still a good player, but he's getting older. Tatar and Nyquist are both, good but not great players. It's just, I don't know. There's really nothing to look forward to there. I feel like they're not really excelling in any position of the ice. And because of that, I just think it's going to be a rough year in Detroit, and they're going to finish last, which hopefully turns into either Dallin or Svechnikov. We already have Svechnikov's older brother, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what the lottery holds. And next up, number 15, second last in the East, I actually had the Florida Panthers. So I think I was mentioning how I thought Arizona made a ton of good trades this year, won them all. Dallas made a ton of good trades, won them all. Chicago made a ton of bad trades, lost them all. I feel like Florida's another team who made a ton of bad trades, lost them all. I think like they lost Smith and Marchescu to Vegas. I don't understand that one. Like, I don't know why they just didn't give them one of the two. I don't know why they gave them both. I feel like especially Marchescu, such a good contract, put up 50 points last year, makes no sense to me. They also made the Demers trade with Arizona, which I think they lost, getting back Jamie McGinn. They then signed Dadonov, who honestly I'm not a huge believer in. Like, I think he's a decent player, but I don't think he's worth what they paid him. Ekblad had a rough year last year. I do think he'll bounce back a bit, but I don't think it's going to be enough to kind of make up for the rest of the team, especially two in goal. They have Luongo and Reimer. Luongo's not getting any younger. Reimer is just like a good backup or a bad starter, however you want to look at it. So for me, kind of similar to Detroit, Florida doesn't have a lot going for them. They do have Ekblad, he can bounce back. Of course, they have Barkov and Huberdeau on the top line, but other than that, I just think there's a lot of better teams in the Eastern Conference. Next up, number 14, we have the Philadelphia Flyers. So Philly, I think, is going to be a bit worse than they were last year. Reason being, I just think they're a young team that's sort of going through, like, not a rebuild, but like a retool. And I honestly don't think it's that bad for them if they don't make the playoffs this year, as they're building around Nolan Patrick now, all their young defensemen. Elliott and Neuwirth as their two goalies I'm not a huge believer in. Elliott last year was supposed to like save Calgary. They didn't make the playoffs, but Elliott was not very good for a lot of that stretch. Neuwirth, again, kind of similar to like Mrazek and Howard. Like, they're both okay goalies. Neither one's showing me they're like a real starting goaltender in the NHL. And then forwards, obviously they have really good forwards in Giroux and Voracek, who've both kind of regressed the last couple years. So if they keep on that path, Flyers will end up here. If not, and they bounce back, Flyers could end up a bit higher in the standings, but still not a playoff team in my opinion. And next up, number 13, are the New Jersey Devils. So I think the Devils are going to do better than last year. Last year they finished last in the East. Obviously adding Nico Hischier to the lineup's huge. Tons of skill. They're playing with Hall. That could be a deadly line. On defense, I think they got a bit better. Adding Mueller and Butcher. Plus even on offense too. They added Johansson. They added Boyle, who obviously can't play at the start of the season, but if he can get back, he'd be a good addition to that bottom six. And they still have Corey Schneider as their starting goaltender, who I think had his worst year ever last season. So assuming that doesn't happen again, he'll have much better numbers. And so that combined with a slightly better defense, much better offense, I think New Jersey does better than last year. Still not a playoff team, but obviously not the bottom of the East. And next up, number 12, we have the Buffalo Sabres. So I think they'll be a lot better than last year. Still not a playoff team, but much more competitive. Obviously, Jack Eichel being healthy all year will be huge for them. I think, honestly, he might even have a career year. It's his last year's entry-level deal. He's going to want to get paid, so he might just go off. The Minnesota trade they made, getting Scandella and Palmville, I think they fleeced Minnesota. I think Scandella and Palmville are both better than Ennis and Foligno. Lehner, obviously, is kind of like the big question there. If Lehner plays well, they can maybe even fight for that playoff spot, finish 9-10. If Lehner just plays okay, they're probably where I have them at 12. If he plays bad, they're maybe even lower. So, for me, good team. Are they good enough to be the playoff team? Probably not. If Lehner stays on his head, though, then maybe they have a chance. If not, they're definitely not making the playoffs. And next up, number 11, we have the Ottawa Senators. So I'm always low on Ottawa. I always feel like Ottawa's not going to make the playoffs, so they're just going to make it. And they always prove me wrong for the most part. Again, though, I have them at 11. Like, just looking at the roster, their forward depth, their defense, outside of, like, obviously Carlson, and then their goaltending, I feel like they're just better teams in the East. Like I was saying, I think Craig Anderson's a good goalie. I think he played very well last year, but I think he played kind of above his average. Defense, they lost Mathot, which is obviously huge. Carlson's best defenseman in the league, I think, unanimously, but isn't enough to kind of push that forward group. I think he scores more points than any of their forwards as well. And for me, I don't know, just looking at their forward depth, I'm always low on Ottawa, and I feel bad with this pick because I feel like I'm going to regret it again, but I just have Ottawa being 11. I think they're another team that, kind of like Buffalo, they're a good team, but for me, they're just going to be on the outside looking in. And I think last year they overachieved a bit, so maybe this year it catches up to them. We'll have to wait and see. Number 10 here are the New York Islanders. So very similar to Ottawa. I think they're a good team. Chance to make the playoffs. Like they're going to be right there fighting for it, but they're going to fall short. The big question, I think, is how well Tavares plays / do they lose Tavares? Like if they're not in the playoffs at the deadline and Tavares isn't going to sign, they trade him. Like they're done. They're not making the playoffs. The goaltending is also obviously a big question too with Halak and Grice. Defense, they lost Hamonic, but they still have a couple of young players like Polak who maybe could step in. Even on forward too, I think Barzal and Hosang could both have really good years this year. So we'll have to wait and see with the Islanders. But again, I think they're going to be another team. It's tough to say with all like the 9, 10, 11 teams. Like they could really be interchangeable. They're usually missing playoffs by 2 or 3 points. So it's tough to say like who's going to make it, who's not with those teams. But I think Islanders are going to just miss. And the next number 9, another big shocker, similar to Chicago, a team that's been in the playoffs for the last like 8 years straight. I had the New York Rangers. So I think, again, very similar to the Islanders in Ottawa. New York's a solid team. For me, though, they're just, for whatever reason, they're going to miss. They're going to be on the outside looking in. There's going to be some other teams that just have a couple more points than them that make that push. Lundqvist, I still feel, is a very good goaltender. For me, he's still a top 5 goalie in the league, but he is getting older, so he might start to play a little bit worse. Plus, they no longer have Ranta to back him up. Defensively, obviously, Shattenkirk's, I think, a huge addition to the power play, to the offense. They did get a little younger, too. They added D'Angelo in the Stepan trade, but they lost Stepan, who's their first-line center. So now it's Zibanejad. Personally, I don't see him as a first-line center, more of a second-line center for me. A lot of good winger depth. I'm not sure about the center depth. Like JT Miller, I think, is probably their second-line center. Nash is getting older. A lot of speed, I think, too, in the forward group, but just not a lot of, like, all-stars, in my opinion. So, it'll be a very interesting team for me. I think New York will either finish where I have them at number 9 or just barely squeaking into the playoffs at, like, 7 or 8. Definitely going to be interesting to see what happens. And now moving on to the Eastern Conference playoff teams. At number 8 here, this is another dark horse team, very similar to the Winnipeg Jets pick. I have the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they made a lot of nice additions in the offseason, adding Darling as a starting goaltender. Honestly, I don't think Darling's a great goalie, but I do think he could be a starting goaltender, which is really all they need in Carolina. Like, opposed to last year, they went back and forth the entire time between Lack and Ward. Just having, like, a starting goaltender will be huge for them. They also added TVR, who I think is a solid defenseman, and their defense is already stacked with Falk, Hanifin, Slavin, Pesci. Like, their defense is probably another one that's one of the best in the league. Maybe, honestly, number 3 behind Nashville and Calgary. And then in forward, they added Marcus Kruger as well. A lot of former Chicago players going to Carolina. And it's a lot of, like, younger players that Chicago is losing. They even got Teravainen the year before. I think, Sebastian Aho could have a great year this year. Like, honestly, I could see him having 60-plus points. It really depends, I guess, just how it goes for them. Skinner's going to be solid. They have a lot of good young players like Lindholm, who I think are going to just start coming along. I just remember, too, they signed Justin Williams. So Carolina's going to be a much better team this year. Last year, they were actually in a playoff position for a bit, and I think this year they're just going to squeak in for the first time in a while. I think they might be, honestly, the team that's gone the longest on missing the playoffs now. So good for them if they do indeed make it in. Next here, number 7, the Montreal Canadiens. So this one was honestly a tough pick. This is basically all down to Carey Price. If Price plays good, the Montreal makes it to the playoffs. If Price just plays okay, they don't make the playoffs. I think their defense got worse. Obviously, Weber's still a stud. Petry's good. They traded away Sergachev, though, who I think might have made the team. Obviously, like, their defensive depth, they have, like, Jordy Ben, Brandon Davidson. For me, it's just not great after Weber and Petry. They also lost Emlyn in Nashville. And then in forwards, like, Jonathan Duran's supposed to come in and be the savior, and I really like Duran, but I don't know if Duran's a first-line center for me. I think he could be a first-line winger. I don't know about the first-line center, though. Galchenyuk really hasn't proven he's a center either. But, of course, you still have Pacioretty, who's, like, one of the top left wingers in the game. So, like I was saying, for me, they're a playoff team if Price plays the way he's supposed to. But if Price plays any below his average, they're missing the playoffs. So, it's all basically going to Carey Price for Montreal. Next year, number 6 are the Boston Bruins. I think they're going to be a much better team than last year. I think, obviously, Pastrnak showed how good he is. I think Charlie McAvoy is a huge addition to the defense. I think, honestly, a lot of people are going to be surprised how good he is. For me, kind of like Clayton Keller, could be a Calder candidate. Obviously, Tuukka Rask, very solid goaltender. Charles getting up there in age, but he's still somehow getting it done. Obviously, Torrey Krug, too, another good offensive defenseman. They still have, obviously, their core, too, in Bergeron, Krejci, Marchand. So I think, Boston, number 6, for me, kind of a lock for the playoffs. Might be higher, might be a bit lower, but should be a playoff team nevertheless. And the next year, guys, a team I'm sure half of you are a fan of. We have the Toronto Maple Leafs finishing 5th in the East. I think it's going to be a very solid team this year. I was honestly so surprised they made the playoffs last year. I didn't think their defense was good enough, but they proved me wrong. Austin Matthews, I thought was going to be a stud. I didn't think he was going to be as good as he was. Same goes even for Marner. Like, their offensive players are just insane, and they're all so young, so good. They added Marlowe, too, to make that team even better on offense. Defense, they got Hainsey, who I'm not huge on, but I guess he's a solid veteran, you know, bottom six guy, whatever you want to do with him. Gardner played a lot better last year as well. I think Riley can make steps. Zaitsev came out of nowhere. I didn't know how good he was. Anderson proved he's like a #1 starting goaltender without a doubt. So I think Toronto, very good team in the East, finishing 5th place, which is actually 2nd in the Atlantic. And next year, guys, number 4, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Obviously had a great year last year. I think they keep it up this year. Not going to be quite as good. I think they're not going to have like 16 straight wins or whatever it was, but the Panarin trade worked out well for them. I think that's going to be a huge steal. Werenski in his 2nd year. Werenski looks like he's going to be a bona fide #1 defenseman. Like, he's amazing. I love him, especially the fact he went to Michigan. And speaking of good defense, Columbus went from having like no defensive depth to having some of the best defensive depth. Like, they have Werenski, Jones, Johnson, Savard, Murray. It's just crazy. If Bobrovsky plays well again too, no reason they shouldn't be at the number 4 spot in the East. And next up here, guys, number 3, the Washington Capitals. So I think they won the President's Trophy the last 2 years in a row. That's going to change this year. Still a very good team, but they lost more players this offseason, I think, than any other team, especially on defense too. They lost Alzner, Schmidt, and Shattenkirk, if you count them. I know they added him at the deadline. For forwards, even they lost Justin Williams and Marcus Johansson, who are both playing their top 6. Like, they have a lot of holes to fill. Luckily for them, they have a couple of good young players coming up in Burakovsky, Verana. I think Orlov, too, could step up this year on D. And, of course, you still have Holtby and Ned, who's a very good goaltender. But for me, I just think they're not going to be as much of a regular season powerhouse as they have in the last couple of years. But still, top team in the East, finishing 3rd place. Next here at number 2, Tampa Bay Lightning finishing 1st in the Atlantic. I had them finishing 1st in the East last year. I think if Stamkos didn't get injured, that honestly might have happened. I think they also just got unlucky. Like, they still almost got back in the playoffs last year. I think they were 1 point out. Honestly, though, like, that top line, Point, Stamkos, Kucherov, talking about top lines, that's another line that's going to be absolutely unreal. Then I think they have Palat, Johnson, Cloran on the 2nd line. Like, those two, that's like, that top 6 is insane. Defense, I think Hedman's a Norris candidate this year. Sergachev can make that team as well. Like, they have a lot of good defensive depth. Vasilevsky looked good last year. I think he could be a starting goaltender. So for me, Tampa wins the Atlantic. They're going to get back in the playoffs and be an absolute powerhouse. And finally, guys, at the number 1 spot, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who I think are going to be a great team again this year. Back-to-back Stanley Cup champions for good reason. Maybe going for a 3-peat. The forward depth, even after losing Bonino, is still very solid. You have 2 of the best players in the game in Crosby and Malkin. Obviously, Crosby's arguably like the number 1 with McDavid. Defense, healthy Chris Letang would be huge for them if he can stay healthy all year. Lost Hainsey, brought back Hunwick, though. Schultz also, they made sure to re-sign. He looked amazing last year when Letang went down. Matt Murray was a starter last year with Fleury backing him up. So, I mean, even without Fleury, Murray still looks like a very good starter in this league. I would say, honestly, a top 10 goalie. And like I was saying, I think they're going to be a great team this year. Not only will they win the Metropolitan Division and the Eastern Conference, I also had them being my President's Trophy winner. So that's it, guys, for my regular season predictions. Hopefully you enjoyed them. If I had to make like an early Stanley Cup prediction, I'd probably say the 2 best players in the league, McDavid versus Crosby, Edmonton versus Pittsburgh in the final, with McDavid spoiling Crosby's 3-peat. That is my early Stanley Cup prediction. But other than that, guys, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, leave the thumbs up. And definitely let me know in the comments section who you think's going to be making the playoffs. Other than like 4 or 5 teams, I think honestly any team could make it this year. The NHL is just so close, which makes it so much fun to watch. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.